So on today's video, I thought I'd talk to you about a really important Canadian band in the history of Boss Tuneage. Not only one of the first releases we did in the first era, but a band that led us to do lots of other bands as well, and were really key to the expansion of Boss Tuneage in those early Mark II days. And that band is the legendary Asexuals.
You take a life of a fallen man, will you tell me something that I don't understand? You move too slow, don't try to look like
So I was trying to think back as to when I actually first heard the Asexuals. Now I'm probably a little bit different to a lot of other people because I actually heard the later era stuff after John Kastner had left the band to form the Doughboys first, rather than the stuff with John. And I remember I pinned it down. I think it was actually at Stu and Si's house in Great Yarmouth from Guru Patrol, and I am sure they played me Dish and Exile from Flutown. Those tended to be on quite a lot with them. They were really into the Asexuals, and I just loved it as soon as I heard it. And then tracked down the CDs and used to just play them to death. Probably tracked down the album actually, because we're talking before I had a CD player. So I had the album versions first, but then bought them on CD. So obviously, as well as 1992 developed, I'd also started getting in touch with John Pastori from Rise, and he used to send me over loads and loads of different Canadian bands. So that's where I first heard the likes of Red Fisher, Sloan, with their Underwhelmed single, when they were very little known before they signed to Sub Pop, and just loads and loads of brilliant sort of stuff that really excited me. Field Day as well were another band, not the Doug Carrion and Peter Courtner band that's around now. This was another band called Field Day back then, I just remember being incredibly excited about the whole Canadian scene. A lot of it was based in Montreal, because obviously Rise were from Montreal, Doughboys were from Montreal, and of course the Asexuals were from Montreal. So when we did the deal with RPN to do the Rise singles and Life About How to Live It, the other release that Ansgar had planned was actually a 7-inch by the Asexuals. So that was really exciting. You know, here's one of my favourite bands at the time, and I'm going to put a 7-inch single out by them, or help to do that. So it was a complete no-brainer for me. And obviously the Love Goes Plaid 7-inch, I think we put out in January 1993.
well, it happened long ago. I was a child. Everything I've dreamed from now is running wild. You tore my pictures off the fridge, and I ruined the songs. You did what you had to do, but I'll take the blame for the rest. And see, I was telling you.
So the band had also played in the UK late in 1990. I think they actually played in London on Boxing Day, and no one knew about the gig. And I remember us all being really gutted that we'd missed them playing over here. So I never actually got to see the Asexuals play live, and it's a real bugbear of mine that I never actually managed to do that. So I think we got about 250 copies of the 7-inch from Ansgar at RPN, and we sent out some promo copies, got some amazing reviews, sent some to Southern, who were distributing us at the time, and started selling some mail order. And I think that we had a few left over for a while. It sold pretty well, but then we did sort of like it then kind of just fizzled out. I think that, for all intents and purposes, in sort of 93, 94, everyone thought the band had, over here, that the band was kind of finished. And it was only later on, when I actually went on holiday to Toronto in 1997. I happened to go into like Tower Records or something in Toronto. And I saw they'd done another album called Fitzjoy in 1996 that had been on this sort of sub-label of like MCA. So they'd signed sort of like but there was nobody new in the UK that had even come out, hardly. So when I restarted the label in sort of 99, one of the first people I managed to sort of track down purely by chance was John Pastore from Rise, and I think it was John who then passed on Sean from the Asexuals details to me, or Sean got in touch with me, I can't remember now. And we just started sort of like conversing on email, because now it was brilliant. You could actually respond to an overseas band, and have a conversation, in real time almost. And so I remember I used to spend like hours on this old time PC that I'd bought in like 1998, and sending emails across to like Sean, and we were going backwards and forwards on this. And the plan was sort of put together to perhaps potentially do like a best of the Asexuals. Sean had bits and pieces of stuff, and I'd obviously started selling now to Japan, so I'd mentioned it to Kaza. And then we obviously got in like, all the bits and pieces that Sean had left over. So he had like 60 copies, I think, of the bonus CD, which had Love Goes Plaid on it, that had gone in copies of Exile from Floontown, which I didn't even know existed. And I remember we bought those off him, and also his sort of a few copies of Fitzjoy that he had, and he'd also done this very short-lived band called Shimmer and done a self-release CD of that. CD-EP, and we bought those as well. So for that bonus CD, we actually sort of put it in like a little wrap-round sleeve and numbered them for 60 and sort of sold it as the Waltz Wish CD-EP. But it was just, it was just literally the end stock, just sort of packaged real DIY and just trying to make it a little bit more collectible. So I think this was really good for Sean as well, because obviously it cleared out all this stock that he'd had lying around, and it gave him a bit of money, and I think some of that money went to fund the recordings of La Motta, because by this time Sean had actually moved to California, and so I think that sort of like kick-started it a bit to get like La Motta up and running. So the plans started to come together to do like a best of the Asexuals. They were one of my favourite bands in the world, and still were. In 1999 and 2000, still are. And so the idea of doing a best of one of my all-time favourite bands was just brilliant. And so Sean started to put it together. But I think probably looking back in hindsight now, had I been approaching this now, I'd have approached it slightly differently, because it was all a bit of a grey area as to who owned what recordings, etc. And I just went with the flow that, the band own it, it's fine, we can put it out. And obviously I think Gubby from Cargo in the States, and obviously Cargo had put out Dish and Exile from Floodtown, got in touch with me. They weren't that happy that this was sort of like happening, so I remember we had to do a bit of sort of negotiation to allow us to do this one-off pressing, mention that the Dish and the Exile Floontown records were still available. So it was all a bit of a grey area, and sort of knowing what I do now in terms of licensing and and what have you for reissuing things, that I probably would approach that in a slightly different way. But we managed to sort it out, and Greater Than Later came out in 2000, so it was one of the first CDs that we actually sort of properly pressed ourselves. Got great reviews, and I remember quite a few went over to Japan. We traded out with other labels, because obviously Asexuals was a name that people knew, and so yes, they weren't around, they didn't hang around for very long, and I think we actually started distributing some of our stuff to Cargo in America on the back of it as well. And I remember Sean was really keen that the last song on Greater Than Later would actually be a track by LaMotta to kind of show what he was doing now. So that was the first LaMotta track to appear on Boss Tuneage. But why I really think that like doing the Asexuals ended up being this mammoth gateway is that there was this kind of snowball effect, because with John and dealing with John from Rise and dealing with Sean from the Asexuals, they started recommending me to other Canadian bands. So that's and people, and that's how Brock Pytel got in touch with me about his solo album. And obviously from doing that with Brock, we then went and did the Doughboys demos, and from that I got in touch with John Kastner, and that led to All Systems Go. So there was this real snowball that this one link with Canada suddenly expanded dramatically over those next couple of years. And obviously I'll speak about all the other bands that we did stuff with from Canada on separate videos. But it really kick-started everything off on that, and I think that sort of led Boss Tuneage down that path of being seen as sort of like, for better words, in those Inksplat logo years, a full-on pop-punk label. That wasn't kind of the initial idea, but it just was one band recommendation on email led to another band contacting me, etc, etc. And of course another band that is totally down to the Asexuals being on Boss Tuneage was Woolworthy from Chicago, because they actually contacted me because they'd done a cover version of Love Goes Plaid. And also that sort of connection that we had led to like Glenn from Does Everyone Stare in Canada contacting me, because he obviously was kind of keen to trade for Canadian bands. And that's how we started that whole hookup that we had as well, on did masses of sort of co-releases together on the back of it. So if I think back about it now, it really was a sort of a gateway band for the label, and the expansion that happened over those next sort of like frenetic Inksplat logo years. That one thing kind of led to another, led to another, led to another. So I think really the importance of Asexuals and Rise in sort of opening those doors for me really can't be underrated. And it was a fantastic band. It was lovely to get a record by the Asexuals out, a best of like one of my favourite bands, and I was a complete fanboy. So you have to remember, this was all the stuff I was kind of listening to in my bedroom in my teenage years, and it was like, and suddenly I was actually releasing stuff by these bands that had meant so much to me for so long. So I think I probably really have to thank like RPN that they decided to do this Asexual 7-inch single in the first place, and that had started and getting in touch with John from Rise, because I think without that, Boss Tuneage could have gone in a very, very different path. But I think the thing that really bugs me is that I never got to see the Asexuals play live. They have done some reform gigs since in Canada and stuff, but the dates just didn't work for me to get over and see them. But maybe one day. That's it for this video. I'll see you on the next one.